welcome to Jurassic Park 3 Minute. We'll be discussing the second Jurassic Park sequel 1 minute at a time. I'm Brad.
And Dave.
And today we're back to end of the week, minute 47 of Jurassic Park 3. Before we get to that, David over at Jurassic-Pedia.com, you can find another article that you've done up this past couple of weeks on the radio bunker 0217, which is the bunker we go to in Fallen Kingdom. And one thing I didn't know is that it's actually a piece of the old park.
Yeah, I believe Claire mentioned this in when they're discussing it in the movie that it was something built for the original park, and presumably Jim and Masrani would have retrofitted it for Jurassic World with newer, better technology. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it would explain the overgrowth, why it's so much more overgrown than the rest of the Jurassic World assets we see on the island anyway. And we've always talked about Jurassic Park, whether or not it's like Disneyland, where you've got those underground tunnels linking buildings. Like one thing, for instance, is just the goat. Where's the goat come from for the T-Rex? All that sort of stuff. That infrastructure's underground. We get a lot of that infrastructure, or some of that infrastructure, showed in the novel as well. So it's always assumed that those tunnels are there, and yeah, now we got to see them.
It's also the tunnels are also depicted in Jurassic Park the game, which is something of a para-canon to the movies. It's theoretically canon in a way that it fits, but it doesn't is not explicitly stated to be canonical. You know, the movies do use like a ton of inspiration from it, especially like Mount Sibo was something that was introduced in Jurassic Park the game, and then was a huge part of Fallen Kingdom.
Yeah, well, it's much. I think we've had this discussion before about Trespasser. Those 3 or 4 weeks before The Lost World come out, Trespasser was canon as well until the film comes out. And as before Jurassic World, and yeah, Jurassic Park the game was made to be canon for that original trilogy. But even going into Fallen Kingdom, seeing the set for the bunker and that, like the majority of the community was thinking that's the geothermal power plant that was also brought up in the game as well. Because even though the power was out, the generators weren't running in Jurassic Park, there is still that scene where John Hammond's eating ice cream and the lights and the ceiling fans are running. So, unfortunately, again, that's probably just a production issue. That, of course, they need light on their actors, whether or not there's candles on Jurassic Park or not. But that's just how things sort of steamroll, and now come Fallen Kingdom, we're thinking that was geothermal power. We need to see a geothermal power plant. And maybe that's why Mount Sibu was reacting, is because we've harnessed this power and it's we've overused it or something like that. So,
well, another thing to remember is that in the novel, the park was actually still running and on power. It's not that the power was out for Jurassic Park; it's that the phones were out. And so it's not. I mean, you can still have the fans going and stuff with the phones jammed and the computer program basically being compromised. You know, because if we recall, Arnold was basically fidgeting with the code for all 2 million lines of the code, looking for whatever Nedry did to it to basically jam up Jurassic Park.
Yeah, and also too, like the generators were more so just to get the amperage and the voltage for those fences.
That's true too.
Which is I was just going to say, which is shown perfectly in The Lost World. When they get to that worker village, you've got the warning lights on the fence working, the lights on, but that fence isn't running because geothermal power doesn't have the ability, like a turbine wouldn't have the ability to power a 10,000 volt fence.
Then again, also another thing to remember is that I think in the novel, the reason the fences were off for so long was because the park had been running on the auxiliary power generator, which automatically didn't supply power to the fences because the auxiliary was only meant to be used to basically power the park long enough to get the fences back on.
Yeah, yep. Yep, and then eventually ran out of fuel and they lost power to the computers again, so...
Mm-hmm. That's possibly something else that the first movie was referencing. We never really touch on it because it's not really an important plot point. They still turn the power back on the same way in the novel as they do in the book. But,
Well, it was a good way to shorten the movie.
Yeah.
The length of that novel, because, yeah, again, in the novel, they got power restored. They had maintenance crews out there. Like, there was one section of fence that had a tree, or a palm tree they'd planted, and one of the turnbuckles had hit the fence and was shorting it out and through to breakers for that section of fence. And Muldoon was out there with the maintenance crews fixing the fence and fixing that tree. Because, again, the tropical storm hit the same night as the Rex broke out. But it sort of went on a whole... It would have been another whole day of the park runnings trying to get the park back online, and Grant and the kids trying to get back to the visitor centre. So again, just Spielberg condensing and tightening up that novel.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, back to Jurassic Pedia. Fantastic little article there, Dave, and some set photos from inside the bunker as well. So yeah, head over to jurassic-pedia.com and check out Radio Bunker. There's some other fantastic stuff on there as well, including some of the cutscenes from Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Did you read Malcolm's book?
Yeah.
So?
I don't know. I mean, it was kind of preachy. And too much chaos. Everything's chaos. It seemed like the guy was kind of high on himself.
Well, that's two things that we have in common.
All right, ready to get into minute 47?
Sure.
As we ended minute 46 of Jurassic Park 3, Alan had found a moment to tuck into some leftover food, and Eric could sit down and start eating small chocolate bars. And as the minute ended, Grant started to cough again, and reached for a beaker with some cloudy-looking fluid inside. As we open on minute 47, Grant brings the beaker closer so he can examine the contents, and Eric says, "Be careful with that. T-Rex. It scares all the little ones, but attracts one really big one with a fin." At the 7-second mark, Grant screws up his face as he realises its contents, and says, "This is T-Rex P." Eric silently nods. And Alan asks, "How'd you get it?" Eric replies, "You don't want to know." At the 26-second mark, as Alan's thrown a candy bar and he starts to open it, he's blunt with Eric that he's surprised he's lasted 8 weeks alone on the island. With this, Eric thinks for a moment and says, 8 weeks? Is that all it's been? Grant says, "Well, you are alive. That's the important thing. And luckily that's one thing we both have in common." At the 44-second mark, Grant asks the question, "Did you read Malcolm's book?" Eric replies, "Yeah." And with this, Grant looks questionable and says, "So?" Eric thinks for a moment and says, "I don't know. It's kind of preachy, and everything's chaos. Too much chaos." And as we end the minute, Eric says, "And it seemed like the guy was kind of high on himself." And this ends minute 47 of Jurassic Park 3. As we end 46, Grant had reached for a beaker off screen, needing a bit of a drink after his bean dish. And as he brings it close, you can sort of see that it's a cloudy liquid inside, and he's not going to drink it, but he coughs again.
Yeah.
And Eric says, "Careful with that T-Rex. It scares some of the small ones, but it attracts one really big one with a fin," which is a good little like, we know that's a Spinosaur. He's sort of describing it as something else, because we had Grant and Billy saying sail on its back earlier, but this one's got the big fin. Which is interesting too. Like, yes, the T-Rex would scare away everything small in it, but it also shows that maybe the Spinosaur is looking for large prey, or just looking for a fight. Grant sort of pulls a bit of a weird face when he says, and sort of he knows, but he asks anyway, "This is T-Rex P?" Eric doesn't say anything, just nods his head and continues to eat his chocolate bar. And this is where you can sort of see that logo, that wrapping logo there with the little bit of product placement. Grant asks, "How'd you get it?" And Eric replies, "You don't want to know."
which I think has actually been kind of one of the most popular questions the fandom has had. How did Eric get that pee? Basically, I think what it was implied in by Johnston or somebody was he stood under it while it was doing its business. But fun fact, scientists now believe that dinosaurs actually excreted their excrement more like birds, where it was like it was just poo and pee together as one substance, and so it was kind of just basically diarrhea.
Yeah, well, that's one of the problems you get with fossils, with no with no skin or internal sort of stuff there. Especially the theropods sort of go in that avian sort of thing where there's only one outshoot, where you have the pee and poo and the one sort of poo. Getting lost. And even in the Lost World, when the T-Rex sits down the front explorer and pee-poos on it, it's just like a bird, just a white muck that the T-Rex comes out. And I would have preferred just to find a puddle. Maybe he's following the Rex, he's in a tree as the Rex walks past or something and scoops it up, because especially when we see him later out in the daylight, he's a very dirty little boy. Yes, it's been 8 weeks, and it is a tropic, so clothes probably won't dry. He's found this what we're going to say is a lab coat at the moment. We'll see more of it next minute, but he's found some sort of clothes. He's near a water source. You could still wash your face and have a bit of a wash up, but when he's walking around in the jungle, I think all the animals are going to know he's there long before he sees them, including the Tyrannosaur. We had Sarah in the last film just saying how much and how good the Tyrannosaurs could smell.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see Eric just walking up under the T-Rex as it's doing its business and holding a beaker up.
But then again, maybe not, because I mean, if dogs, for example, will cover themselves in dirt and stuff to basically hide their perfumey bubble bath soap we stick on them, because otherwise they're stinky dogs, you know? They smell like dog. And their natural instinct is to cover up that scent. So I would think that maybe it's not his natural instinct to do so, but Eric maybe had at some point just eventually covered up his scent after being in the jungle for so long, covered in dirt, you know?
Mm. Well, we do see him when he saves Grant. He has got those leaves and all that sort of stuff on his yowie suit, or his camouflage suit. So maybe there's foliage on that is a deterrent. Again, he's had 8 weeks. He's been on the island for 8 weeks. There's all sorts of adventures he could have in those 8 weeks that we just don't know about. He might have even gone predator and just put the mud on to hide his smell as well. But
well, that's another thing is that was actually recently brought up, I think, by Jack Ewins, that that Survivor, the first-person account of from the Jurassic Park Adventures book series that we get of Eric Kirby's quote-unquote adventures on Isla Sorna, is the idea that it's told from a first-person account, so you get a kind of the unreliable narrator effect, like you kind of do with The Hobbit. And he brings up the fact that, I mean, nothing in it really necessarily contradicts anything in the movie, so it becomes kind of like Jurassic Park, the game, being this para-canon, where it theoretically fits without it actually being canon.
Yeah. I really need to get those comics. Or those novels. You see them on eBay every now and then. I must get onto that and get one. But it's great. Grant sort of holds that weird face and slowly places the beaker back. Careful not to break it. Where even if it did break, I think shut the hatch. It might keep the smell in for a little bit, but I think more so of just having that smell in there. You need to spend a night in there. You don't want that. It's obviously got the rubber plung bung in it for a reason.
Well, the other thing is that animal urine carries a lot of, well, human urine does too, but animal urine especially carries a lot of pheromones, and that attracts like other animals or tells other animals which animal has been around, and so you get these kind of things, especially like predators will scent mark their territory, and if you break that, you will scare away the smaller dinosaurs, but especially the smaller predators. But you'll bring like a big T-Rex or a big Spinosaurus in this case. When I was a kid, I never realized he said fin. I always thought he said a big one with a fury, and so I always imagined that sure you're gonna scare some of the smaller T-Rex away, but you're going to bring a really big, mean, ugly, nasty T-Rex is going to be pissed off.
Or just an old buck that looks after his child.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other thing too. Like, yes, he's in an old water truck here. I'd say, you might not even be safe from raptors in this thing. Like, yes, the tanker itself, water tankers themselves are pretty durable, but the hatch that he's sort of climbed through here to get into it, most of the time they're just like a loose sheet metal thing to stop water splashing out and to stop sort of debris getting in. Or like birds or anything, like any wildlife falling in and stuff like that. So that's a very weak point. But definitely if you get a Tyrannosaur or even a Spinosaur, it could probably wouldn't pull it out of the mud, but it'd probably lay waste to that tanker and be able to get in there, especially after 8 years of rust.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But Grant slowly said that. Eric grabs another chocolate bar and asks dessert, and Grant nods as Eric throws him the bar, and Grant starts to open it. And he says, Eric, I must say, I'm astonished. You've lasted 8 weeks on this island. And sort of Eric stops eating, looking confused, and is that all it's been? When you go camping and stuff like that, if you go away, like Easter long weekend, I went away for 4 days, and you try not to look at the clock and that, and you do sort of lose concept of time, but I suppose after 8 weeks you'd lose concept of days as well. I don't know if you'd go as far as just doing the little scratches on the wall of how many days it's been.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking you would probably do. At least that's what I would do, you know? I'd try to keep some kind of track, but then again, maybe he just eventually gave up any idea of anybody finding him. So he didn't really feel like it was necessary to keep track anymore, you know?
Yeah. By the time he even found the tanker, he might have already lost track of how long it had been. Yeah, unless he found a pen to write on the back of his hand what day it was or anything like that. But Grant continues, well, you're alive, and that's the important thing. And thanks to you, that's one thing we have in common. And the two go silent for again a little bit, and Grant asks a question. Did you read Malcolm's book? And Eric replies, yeah. And Grant, so? And Eric says, I don't know. He was kind of preachy. And too much chaos. Everything's chaos. When Grant watches this on with a smile, and Eric continues, it seemed like the guy was high on himself. And that's where the minute ends, but Grant's loving this. Like, again, this is Malcolm post the Lost World 2, we're assuming, post the San Diego incident. So he's already survived Jurassic Park. He knows I was right, you're wrong about the park itself. Then he's been to Sauna, and again, taking dinosaurs off this island's the worst thing you could do, and I'll be there when you learn that. And he'd be that high on himself because he's always been right the whole time.
But that does bring up the question, in Jurassic World, we do see Claire's assistant, Zia, reading a book by Ian Malcolm. Was that the book, or did Ian Malcolm write a second book after the incident, after the San Diego incident?
Well, I think we touched on it when Ludlow was getting stuck into him for sharing his story to the papers and that. I think then we're saying too, it's sort of now looking at that book, and especially since it's the photo of the Lost World Malcolm on that book, and not the Jurassic Park version, or even what we see later with Jurassic or Fallen Kingdom. Well, that's the problem. You got Ludlow saying you're trying to sell wild stories, and Malcolm saying no, I never took a cent. Whether that was just newspaper articles or if he did write a book in between that period, and you'd think InGen would be able to step in to stop it getting published.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I was thinking. I mean, it's a lot harder to stop the publishing of newspaper articles, especially with the First Amendment in the United States. So,
yeah.
And journalists, it's generally considered poor form to pay your interviewee. So I doubt that